You've seen the headlines, right? You've definitely heard the buzz. Drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy, they're not just medications anymore. They're a full-blown cultural phenomenon. They are completely changing the way we talk and think about weight loss and metabolic health.
They promise these absolutely life-changing results, and for many people, they deliver. But they also come with this growing list of really serious questions and potential costs. So today we're going to break it all down, the science, the history, and the controversy to really figure out what's going on with the drugs that seem to have changed, well, everything.
First off, let's just be crystal clear about why we're even calling this a revolution. In the clinical trials for semaglutide, patients lost, on average, 12.4% of their body weight. Now, to put that into perspective for you, before these drugs came along, that kind of result was pretty much only possible with major bariatric surgery. This isn't just a step forward, it is a monumental leap.
But here's the thing, this overnight success was actually a century in the making. The story really begins way back in 1906. Scientists were basically chasing a ghost, this mysterious hormone they suspected came from the gut and could somehow control insulin.
So this search for what they called incretin, which started all the way back in 1906, it basically went cold for a decade, and then bam, the 80s hit and things started to heat up fast. You can see it here. In '83, scientists finally sequenced a peptide they called GLP-1, but the real honest-to-goodness breakthrough came in 1986 from a peptide chemist named Svetlana Mojov. Her work led directly to the confirmation in '87 that a very specific, shorter piece of that GLP-1 was the powerhouse hormone they'd been looking for all along.
And you have to love how understated this conclusion is. Mojov figured out that the big, full-length peptide wasn't actually the active drug. No, it was a precursor. The real magic, the secret sauce, happened when the first 6 amino acids were chopped off, leaving behind this much shorter, way more potent version. This was the key that unlocked the entire field.
Okay, so problem solved, right? Well, not so fast. There was a huge problem. This amazing new hormone was incredibly fragile. In the human body, it got destroyed almost instantly. That made it practically useless as a medicine.
This slide really just puts the whole challenge into stark relief. Our natural GLP-1 lasts for maybe 2 minutes in our blood. 2 minutes. The scientists had to figure out how to take that molecule and re-engineer it to survive for an entire week. That's over 10,000 minutes. We're talking about an absolutely massive feat of molecular engineering.
So how on earth did they do it? Well, a team at Novo Nordisk, led by Lot Knudsen, came up with this brilliant 3-part solution. First, they tweaked the molecule's structure just a little bit to make it resistant to the enzyme that usually chews it up. Second, they bolted on a long fatty acid chain. You can think of it like a molecular grappling hook. And third, and this is the really clever part, that hook allows the drug to latch onto a common protein in our blood called albumin. It basically turns albumin into a slow-release fairy, protecting the drug and carrying it all around the body for days at a time. Just ingenious.
And this breakthrough, it worked. It created a blockbuster drug. But, and this is the crucial pivot in our story today, when you manipulate the body's hormones that powerfully, sometimes the body pushes back. And it can push back with a whole cascade of complications.
The side effects, well, they really run the gamut. You've got the common stuff, the nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea that can affect a lot of people when they first start. But then you start getting into the more serious, and in some cases, hotly debated concerns. Let's dig into the evidence for a few of these, starting with one of the risks that's most clearly established. So take a look at the data from the huge LEADER clinical trial. The rate of acute gallstone disease was 3.1% in the group taking the drug, liraglutide. In the placebo group, it was just 1.9%. Now, you might look at that and think it's not a huge difference, but in the world of drug safety, that is a statistically significant increase in risk.
And just to be clear, this wasn't some fluke finding in one study. A massive meta-analysis that pulled together data from 76 different trials confirmed it. GLP-1 drugs do significantly increase the risk of gallbladder issues, and that risk seems to go up the higher the dose and the longer you're on the drug. So the main point here is, this one is pretty well documented.
Okay, but this is where it gets a lot trickier. For some of the other potential risks, the data seems to point in completely different directions, and that creates a really confusing picture for both patients and their doctors. Let's use the risk of intestinal obstruction as our example.
So, back in 2022, a study using health records from the UK found a pretty concerning signal. It showed that people on these drugs had a higher rate of intestinal obstruction, which is a very serious blockage, compared to people on a different class of diabetes drugs.
But then, just this year, a massive Scandinavian study, we're talking over 300,000 people, came to the exact opposite conclusion. They found no significant link whatsoever. So, what do you do with that? This is a perfect example of science evolving in real time, and it's why you see all these conflicting headlines. The jury is still very much out on this one.
And if you thought that was confusing, the debate over psychiatric risks is even more complex. When you look at the data around suicidal thoughts, you literally get three completely different stories depending on where you look. You have spontaneous reports from patients and doctors, which show a potential safety signal, but then you have the super-controlled clinical trials, which found no increased risk at all. And then, a huge analysis of real-world health records found the complete opposite, that the drugs were actually linked to a reduced risk. It just goes to show how critical it is to understand where the data is coming from.
So with all of this messy, conflicting data, what does this actually mean for the millions of people who are taking these drugs or thinking about starting them? I mean, how are you supposed to weigh the incredible benefits against a risk profile that is this complex and, frankly, still evolving? Well, one major concern that's getting a lot more airtime is sarcopenia, the loss of muscle. Studies are showing that for many people, around 40% of the total weight they lose on these drugs isn't fat, it's lean body mass. And losing muscle, especially as you get older, can have a huge impact on your strength, your mobility, your overall health. It is a critical trade-off that has to be carefully managed.
So where does all this leave us? Let's try and sum it up. On one hand, there's no question these drugs are a monumental scientific achievement. The benefits for heart health and metabolic health are proven and can be profound. But on the other hand, the side effect profile is significant, it's complicated, and we are still figuring parts of it out. And as we've seen, the science is still evolving. The one thing that is absolutely clear is that this is not a simple magic shot.
And really, that leads to the most important takeaway of all. There's no one-size-fits-all answer here. This decision to use these drugs has to come down to a very careful, very personal conversation between a patient and their doctor, where you weigh your specific health needs and goals against this very complex set of potential risks. And you have to remember, this revolution is really just getting started. As tens of millions more people begin these treatments around the world, we are essentially embarking on the largest real-world experiment in history. The question isn't just about what we know now, it's about what we have yet to learn about the long-term, unintended consequences of hacking one of the body's most fundamental hormones.